I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see a thing that says the art of storytelling.
We can.
We can.
Sometimes people give me a bit of a funny look when I say, we need to think about the story we're going to tell, because they say, oh, I just need a bit of video. I just need to think about doing a podcast. And I will put it out there and people will hang upon my every word. And I always think back to some early PR advice I was given back in my corporate life when a very experienced PR person said, there's a lot of BS talked about PR, she said, but really what you need for some good PR is a decent news story. She said, and there are two components to a news story. She said, number one, it's got to be new. It's got to be something that hasn't been told somewhere else. She said, number two, it's got to have a good story. I said, and? She said, no, that's it. She said, if you can crack those two, then you're on a winner. And I thought, that's interesting. That's interesting because stories are not something that you associate really with the world of work. Maybe there's more to this than I'd thought. So today I want to talk a bit about storytelling, the background to storytelling, and why it is actually really important when it comes to promoting your business. So if you're sitting comfortably, we shall begin. Now, storytelling often makes people think of childhood, but I would like to take you back much further than that, back to a time when people lived in tribes, much like the tribe that Pete has assembled here today. So when you think back to those early days of civilization, I want you to imagine that we are, after a hard day's work, all sitting around a fire. And that fire is doing two things. It's keeping us warm, it's keeping the wild animals away, but it also provides a platform and an opportunity for people to share stories. Because storytelling has a very long history. It does go back to the days before written language, and it fulfilled a really important task, because telling stories were the way that people communicated down through the generations, and it was also a way of capturing and recording what had happened to the tribe. It was about capturing the myths and legends and the traditions, which were important from the cultural side of things, but it was also really important to capture the experiences and the expertise, because people didn't just become good hunters or good crop growers or good medicine people or good child carers by accident. That was something that they developed. They accumulated expertise, and before they went off to meet their ancestors in the hunting ground over the horizon, they needed to find a way of harnessing and capturing that expertise and passing it on through the generations. And it was by doing that as part of a story and repeating it, that was how that collective knowledge of the tribe was captured. So stories were very much more than just entertainment. It was about collaboration. It was about communication. And it's more than just information, because it's actually about the way you feel. A story will make you feel something, a sense of collective emotion, sharing of meaning. And in a way, it gave a kind of common purpose and identity to the tribe. So storytelling was a really, really big thing. And although we've evolved a bit, some of those, the ways that our brains work has not changed that much. So storytelling really still affects us in quite a deep way. The psychology of this, and I am not a psychologist, so this is, you'll have to take this on trust, because I looked it up and I thought that seems to make a lot of sense. Stories can create a pathway to the creative part of our brain. Now, some people say it's the right side of the brain. Some people poo-poo the right-left brain thing and say it's all been debunked. But there's a part of everybody's brain that is the creative part. And stories are like a super highway to that part of the brain. And what doesn't seem to be in any doubt is that imagined experiences are processed by that part of the brain in the same way as real ones. So if you can create a really vivid story, your brain treats that in the same way as something that actually happened to you. And so by engaging your audience, by telling them that story, by triggering their imagination, they're not just listening to a whole bunch of stuff that you're telling them, they're actually starting to become active participants They're actually thinking their way into it's as though that they're sitting there and this story that you're telling them is happening around them. So you're drawing them in and they're going to remember this stuff. It's not about giving people a list of information you've got right inside their heads. So what do we need to tell a good story? Well, lots of stuff. But I think one of the most important things you need to do is to have the right kind of characters, because there are no strong characters in the story. It's all a bit meh. It's all a bit vanilla. It's yeah, I suppose that makes sense, but it's not going to stick in people's minds. So heroes, villains, and sidekicks is my kind of shorthand for that. But I just thought it might be interesting to go into some of the character types that are traditionally used by writers. And you'll see these time and time again, used in different ways. As you watch films, you read novels, so on, watch plays. The key character, and not every story will have every character archetype, but there are a few key ones, and really a protagonist, what you might call a hero, although protagonists aren't always very heroic, and sometimes they're heroic at times and a bit flawed at other times. But the protagonist is the character to whom the story happens. They are the central character. Without them, it's just like the sun rose and the day happened, but nothing very interesting happened. The protagonist is the person who carries the story all the way through, all the character. But if they were just mooching around by themselves, again, nothing very interesting would happen. In the same way as you need a little bit of friction to be able to move something. If you've got no friction, it's like trying to push a car along an icy road. Your feet are going to move a lot, but nothing's going to happen. Nobody's going to go anywhere. So a protagonist needs an antagonist, something to fight against. Now, the antagonist could be a specific character. It could be a group of characters. It could be an institution. So in Erin Brockovich here, the antagonist was the big polluting corporation and the people that worked for them. Often you'll have a companion. A deuteragonist is the word I learned for this. It's the companion, it's the sidekick, it's the person who mooches along. It's the Watson to Sherlock Holmes. It's the donkey to Shrek. The companion has a couple of functions. On the face of it, they're just there to give the protagonist a bit of a hand, but actually they do quite a few more interesting things as well. And one of the things they do is they represent you, the viewer or the reader, and they can ask things that you'd like to know. Gosh, Sherlock, how did you work this out? And they can ask those questions and have them answered. So they can represent you, and they can also fulfill a few other roles as well. You will sometimes find that the protagonist needs to take some advice, so they'll have a confidant or a mentor. Obi-Wan for Luke Skywalker, and the confidant mentor doesn't usually play a massive part in terms of how long they're in the novel, how much time they spend on screen, but they when they say something, it's really important. They have a key role in directing where the protagonist is going to go. Sometimes you will find someone who's a skeptic, who actually thinks the protagonist is a bit of an arse and doesn't mind telling them so. Sometimes the companion will do this. They'll act as a foil, somebody for the protagonist to bounce ideas off. Generally speaking, they're not the antagonist. They're really, the skeptic of foil is not a nasty person. They don't necessarily believe that the protagonist is on the right lines, or they've got all their marbles. And then we have a bunch of tertiary characters, and these are just handy people who provide a little bit of extra color, an extra bit of substance, and maybe just nudge the action back on the right path if there's a danger of things going off kilter a little bit. Characters all very well, but we can't just have all these characters bumbling about, not doing anything useful. We need to give them a story structure. And it's the structure that moves things along. The structure is what keeps people engaged in your story. Because if it's too meandery, it's like, I haven't got enough heartbeats left. I need to go and do some other stuff with the remaining time in my life. The classic for a story structure is the 3-act structure. That's where it plays with 3 acts, and at its most simplistic, the 3-act structure has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end. And surprisingly, you sometimes will see things that don't have a beginning, middle, and end. And then when you look at them and you realize that they don't have a beginning, middle, and end, you think, that's why this feels a bit unsatisfying. You know, somebody has lurched into a story in the middle and they're giving you all the detail, but they haven't set it up for you. Or, you know, they give you a whole bunch of information, but there's no conclusion at the end, and it leaves you unsatisfied. So another way of looking at this is you have a setup initially where you get to know the characters and the situation. There's some sort of challenge or confrontation. That's the 2nd act. And then something needs to come to a head. Matters need to get resolved one way or another in the 3rd act. Now, there are loads and loads and loads of different variations on story structures, and the 3-act structure isn't the be-all and end-all, but it's a really good place to start. If you remember nothing other than the beginning, middle, and end version of it, that sends you down the right lines. Before I go on to talk about one that I think is quite useful for what we want to do, here's a good example of a 3-act structure, which probably isn't going to do a great deal for us. And it's called Freytag's pyramid. It's basically what tragedies are built along. And in the tragedy, it sort of goes all the way up to a crescendo in the first part. So going through the 1st act and partway through the 2nd act, the hero or the protagonist is on a rise. Great things are happening. They're sort of smiting their enemies as they go. They come to a climax right in the middle, and you think this is all going in the right direction, but we're only about halfway through. And, you know, they win the battle or whatever their challenge is. But after that, it's all downhill. And actually, you know, power goes to their head. You know, so think of something like Macbeth, for instance. You know, seizes the throne, but it all goes horribly wrong, and basically it all ends in disaster. So it's a classic tragedy structure, which it's not the kind of thing that sells a lot of tickets at the box office, but it's still a structure that gets used. And if you watch something and you think, that was a bit grim, maybe a crime drama where actually the villain doesn't get caught at the end, there's probably elements of a tragedy in there. Much more useful to us, and this is essentially what I fall back on when I'm looking for a story structure with a lot of clients, is the hero's journey. And it's something that gets used time after time after time. And the reason why it works is because it's a really useful structure. And with a few tweaks and twiddle, you can use it all over the place. And I like it because it leaves everyone feeling quite satisfied at the end. You know, you have a good ending. You don't feel like you've been robbed. So imagine a hero like Shrek. You know, definitely not the perfect hero. I think everybody would agree Shrek has his faults. God love him. The hero's journey usually starts. Nothing interesting is happening to the hero. He's pottering about in his ordinary world, and all of a sudden called upon, or she's called upon to do something extraordinary. There's a call of adventure. Hey, it's your big opportunity, hero. And the hero says, nah, you're all right, thanks. I'm quite happy here in the swamp. I'm really not interested. Thank you very much for your invitation, but no, pick on someone else. But usually the challenge doesn't go away, and there's often a meeting with a mentor who says, you know what, I know you think you're a bit of a loser, and in many ways you are, but we think you have something more to give. Give it a go. And in Act 2, the hero, perhaps reluctantly, goes off on the first step of their journey. And along the way, they will meet many tests and challenges, and they will meet allies who help them and enemies who seek to thwart them as they get towards the innermost cave, the highest, most castle, the darkest challenge. And when they get there, there is always an ordeal. Isn't there always an ordeal? Indiana Jones, you'd think, mate, why do you not just stay at home? You've got a nice gig there at the university. What's with all the going out getting crushed by, big lumps of rock and Nazis everywhere, but it's all part of the challenge. So you have to go through the ordeal, and having successfully negotiated the ordeal, possibly at some cost to some of your companions, there will be a reward. And you think, hurrah, hurrah, we've done it. But we are still only at the end of the second act. There's another third of the film still to run. Now it's time to go back with the reward. And the road back is never as simple or plain sailing as you think it ought to be. And half the time, you might get part of the way back. You might get all the way back and find that everything's changed while you've been away. There is a disaster. Someone else has married the guy. You missed your opportunity. What to do? What was that all about? What a waste of time. See, I knew my first instincts were right. I should have stayed in my ordinary world. But it never ends there. There is some level of resolution, and we get back to a new status quo, right? That has been formed as part of the journey. And, in some way, shape, or form, things are certainly different from they were before, and probably better in some way, but which couldn't have worked out from the start. Now, I like that because, without maybe all of those things, so, maybe, we wouldn't necessarily want to have an ordeal in the middle of some of our stories, but this is a story structure that I think you can adapt to all sorts of different tales that you might want to tell about your business. Because you might be thinking, well, this is all very entertaining, David, and I'm almost glad that I got up so early to kind of listen to this. But so what? Yeah, I'm a business owner. How does this all help me? And the key thing is that whole ability to get inside people's heads by telling them a story, by sparking their imagination, by making them feel part of what's going on rather than just feeding them a whole bunch of information points, means that stories can help you. And there are stories in your business. People have said to me, well, I'm just an accountant. I'm just a landscape gardener. I'm just a dog groomer. And there's nothing interesting. There is always something interesting. I've never met a business that didn't have at least 5 good stories in them. So what are the stories that you could tell for your business? Well, how about the story of why you started your business? If you are maybe the main person or often the only person in your business, you are the story of your business. Where did you come from? What was your background? What happened to you? What was your challenge? Why did you start this business? And I've heard fascinating stories from people just in this group about how they came to be doing what they're doing today. And it's often really, really different from what they started out doing, but there is a pivotal moment somewhere in their story that caused them to start doing what they're doing. Just the story of how you created your products and services, or stories. There's always a reason why people started selling a particular product. There's reasons why people added to that product range. There's reasons why people focus their services in a certain area. Tell that story, produce, put the color towards it. And some of the best stories of all are actually told by your customers. This is what I love, a case study. A good case study told from the perspective of the customer is a story, because there's all the elements there of the hero's journey, with the customer having some sort of challenge. They need some help. They needed, and they needed a hero. They needed someone to come and help them out. A thing happened and their lives were improved by it. Those are fantastic stories. Don't waste a case study on someone going, I needed this thing, and you were really good. It's not enough. Draw them in. You're going to make your prospective customers feel like they are in some way similar to your case study subject. And we shouldn't forget the audience in all of this, because the way you tell the story, the way that you're going to trigger that emotional reaction does depend very much on who your audience is. So, people will have heard me bang on about this before, but think very carefully. Who's your primary audience? You can have lots of different audiences, but think about who your primary audience is. And the more focused you can be on them, the more effective your story is going to be. Think about what you want to say to them and how you want to say it, because tone is really important as well. And think about, why are they going to start listening to your story? What's that hook that you're going to do? Why are they going to stop what they're doing and focus on you? Start focusing on you. And then what's going to keep them listening right the way through the end? What's going to make them pay attention in the first act and stick with you through the second act, all the way through to the third act and the resolution? And you have to be a little bit schizophrenic about this. You've got to think about what you want to get out of it, but you really, really have to think about what your audience is going to get out of it, and keep asking yourself what's in it for them. Because if you can't answer that, it's probably, the answer probably is there's not enough in it for them to keep them sticking with you. We have had our time together. It is nearly time to go. The campfire is flickering low. The burning embers are there. They're still keeping us warm, but it's time to go. I just want to leave you with one thought, that stories are very, very powerful tools, and they are far too powerful for you to leave in the hands of others. So before we go off, some to meet the ancestors and the hunting grounds and the sky, and some to meet prospective clients in an office block in Bracknell, I would like to just leave you with the thought that make sure that when your story is being told, that it's you doing the telling and not someone else. And if you need any help about where to go next with your stories, come and have a chat. Thank you.